My name is Vicky Roberts. I've been part of the Alexandria team since it started, since we started the project, and I've actually been employed at Shumla since about 2014 as an archaeologist. In case you don't know a whole lot about me, let me make sure I don't go forward. So in case you don't know what I look like, that's what I look like. But you'll also see that there's a lot of people there that are also involved with the Alexandria Project. So it's obviously not just the archaeological team, it's people like Emil in the background doing a lot of the administrative work for us, and especially y'all being our moral, emotional, and financial support that really helped us get through this project. And so you'll get to see almost all of these faces at some point today, hopefully all of them. So a little bit more about me. I graduated from Texas State University in 2014 with as a major, an anthropology major with a biology minor. I actually interned at Shumla for about a year before I was hired full time, and I've been working here ever since then. I actually first got introduced into the area in 2011 as part of my field school. You have to take a field methods course when you're doing an anthropology major at our university. And that's actually where I met some of the folks from Shumla. I met Amanda and Charles, who were mentioned earlier. And so that's kind of how I got connected to this area, was because my field school was actually here in the Lower Pecos. My options were either to go to somewhere in Texas where it was cheaper, more affordable, or to go to Belize and do some Maya archaeology. And I'm very glad that I chose this field school. It's a really cool area. Let me go back one more real quick. And so as part of the Alexandria Project, I specialize actually in the construction of all the digital forms and things that we use out in the field on the tablets. I built our database that houses all of the information that we're taking from the rock art. So how many figures there are, how many panels there are, what direction is the site facing, things like that, all of our notes. And so initially, really early on in my career, I learned a lot about database design, a lot more than I ever thought I would in my undergraduate degree. So, and so what that is actually going to lead to is me having more of a role, more of a database role as we move on. And so if you want to especially hear more about the what's next, what are we going to do with all this data we've collected for the last 3 or 4 years, then definitely tune into Tim and Audrey's presentation at 2:30. So as we started strategic planning in 2016, we really faced some stark realities. Number one, Carolyn had demonstrated that the art was compositional and it could be deciphered. And so her book, The White Shaman Mural, An Enduring Creation Narrative, was just about to be published there in 2016. Number two, we knew that there was alarmingly clear evidence that the art was disappearing at a rapid pace due to both human and environmental impacts. The flood photo that you see there underneath number two is actually from a flood event in 2014, where it dropped about 12 inches of rain in about 8 hours or less here in the region. And in case you were wondering, the forecast for that day was scattered thunderstorms, and we ended up getting catastrophic flash flooding. Number three, we knew that we couldn't spend 1 to 3 years like we typically do to record and document a single site to the fullest and highest level that we would like to, because it would simply just take too long. It would take us, 600 years. It's obviously way beyond our lifetime. So we needed a way to really figure out how could we do this quickly and effectively, and at least touch all these sites before we did some more of that really intensive data collection. And number four, we knew that Shumla was one of the best equipped and positioned with the knowledge, the methodology, and the landowner relationships to actually do this task. So we really felt obligated. We really needed to do this because the art really does deserve this kind of level of documentation. I'll flip the page, I'm sorry. And so obviously we were up for a couple of challenges. One being, how do we speed up that data collection? If it takes us 1 to 3 years to do a full range of documentation at a site, how can we parse that down into something that's more manageable for us to be able to do in some cases only in a few hours, but in other cases it could still take us several days to even just get a baseline amount of data. And number two, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, were the problem was, how are we going to pay for this? And Jared's photo here, I think, perfectly illustrates that kind of panic of how are we going to pay for all of this. And so Carolyn and Karen put their heads together with the help of the rest of the team to draft a research design that could achieve the goal of a baseline documentation of over 300 sites in the Lower Pecos in as little as 4 years. So this means collecting high resolution image and informational data quickly, which at a minimum could drive future research in the case that the site could be lost in the future. This ambitious research plan had the stated goals, which you'll see listed on the bottom left of the slide there. And they were to collect data that could be used to address the project research questions and inform Lower Pecos rock art research and scholarship for years to come. To determine the threatened status of the rock art sites and to prioritize them for documentation in the future. To build the stronger relationships of local landowners, land manager, and the site stewards that are protecting these sites, and to increase the public awareness of the importance of this rock art and preserving these for future generations. Keep these goals in mind because we'll come back to them later in this presentation. So once we had the research design drafted and completed, then we had to test it. Could we actually do this? Was this a feasible plan? And so the team that's pictured there, including myself, Jared, headed out to the field with the help of a National Geographic grant to test the research plan. We called this our pilot project. And so we were testing to see if we could actually do and collect this baseline information for 10 sites in a single month. We did succeed. We ended up recording 10 sites in about 8 days of field work. And a fun fact, if you're familiar with the Whitty Museum in San Antonio, they had renovated their People of the Pecos exhibit. And so it had actually reopened in the weekend between our pilot project. So we actually conducted field work for 4 days. We stopped, we packed all our things, left, got home, repacked to go to San Antonio, and we went to the gala that weekend. And so we could show off our really impressive tan lines and things that we had gotten from that week. And I'm sorry, you're gonna have to endure a lot of really terrible jokes. So, and it wasn't enough that we had tested this plan and put it into place, but we also needed the skilled personnel to help us execute this. And so that included a lot of the faces you saw earlier in the presentation and the people that Jessica had introduced earlier in the 10:30 welcome session. This is, so just that amount of people, but it also doesn't even include the amount of interns that we actually took on and trained during the course of the project, which was about 11 or so interns. There probably were a few more. I had to make sure I didn't double count them because some of them doubled up as chemistry interns and archaeology interns. A lot of what the crew did during the initial stages of the research design was to figure out the best hardware and software technologies to make our research design work. So we really needed to figure out how we could organize our images and the other data. What was the best way to do that? What software do we need to process the things that we wanted to do? So the things like the GigaPans and the 3D models that we did. And actually Bob and Evelyn, who are in the session, helped us a lot with the GigaPan things. They have been doing this for years, and we really leaned on them and their experience in helping us kind of figure out how to do GigaPans and kind of how to use them for what we wanted to do in this data collection aspect. We found a lot of support using some of the Adobe products. So Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop help us, especially with when we want to, even just like cleaning up images, maybe if we want to share like a really pretty image, but also for our data collection, it helps us rename all the photos quickly because we have a very systematic way of naming the files, because we need to know what those photos are for. Every image that we collect has a purpose. Some of them could just be to document us, the crew in the field, but other data could be part of the 3D model. Other photos could be part of the GigaPans, or they're just general photos. And so we needed to make sure and develop templates and make it easy and quickly that we could process a lot of that data. At some sites, we collected over 1 terabyte worth of photographic data that we had to then manage and rename and distribute into the appropriate sections on our server. So using Lightroom really helped us out a lot. And the development of this project definitely benefited a great deal from the amazing support of our colleagues, like Charles and Amanda. They weren't part of the team in the very initial, but once we finally got all the funding, which you'll see here, they were finally able to join the team and we could get started and get running, which was really great. To pay for the project, like everything we do, we had to face the reality that raising every dime that we would spend, it was going to take a lot of time, and we needed a way to really kind of bring this home to people and make them understand how critical the situation was. We needed to state a clear purpose, and we needed to choose a name that was going to drive that interest. And so that's why we decided on the Alexandria Project, because it kind of invokes that image of the Library of Alexandria, the one that ends up burning, and we lose all of that ancient information in that library, which is really devastating, considering how much more we can know now if we had been able to keep it. So it kind of gives us that sense of urgency, and also it kind of is another layer of kind of reinforcing the idea that these images can be deciphered, like Carolyn discusses in her White Shaman book. We can decipher these, and we need to try to preserve them in the state that they're in now before we lose them. We focused on a diversity of funding sources, which included foundations, corporations, individuals, and government grants. We also seem to have held up a lot of signs, and so you'll see us holding up, like, we made the match, and thank you to National Geographic, thank you to the Summerlee Foundation. These are just a few of the foundations that gave to us that we especially wanted to call out, considering, and I think a lot of these, well, in particular, the Summerlee grant, we actually found out that we received that grant while we were in the field through a satellite text message. And so it was probably hours of delay between Jessica telling us and us finding out, because we were working in the field at the time. So that was really cool. But of course, more than anything, without y'all, we would not have been able to accomplish what we have in the last 4 years. Without a doubt, your promises to give helped us to know that we could count on a strong financial foundation as we prepared to take on this 4-year project. And sincerely, truly, y'all helped us a great deal. I know I still wouldn't be able to be here if it wasn't for y'all doing what I love to do on a daily basis, which is very cool. Thank you all guys for all of your support, and not even just financially, but also with your help in advice, like Bob and Evelyn with the GigaPans, and kind of helping us through that and demonstrating it to us. Even Mark Willis, who's not in this session, but he's a really awesome techie archaeology guy who trained us to use the 3D models, how to take the photos and run the 3D models. And so we really do have like this kind of wide group of people all helping in their own way to help us be successful in this. And especially Emil. Emil was the president of the board during the time while we were doing this. So Emil did a lot of this in the background. And so special shout out to you, Emil, for all your hard work too. Okay, so after all of that fundraising in the very beginning, we were finally able to officially kick off the project on August 1st of 2017. And so here's our crew photo from that very first site. So originally the site didn't have a name when we went there, but it was located on the property of Missy Harrington, who was introduced earlier, our Shumla librarian. Her and her husband owned the property that the Shumla campus actually sits on and leased that portion of the land to Shumla. And so that campus is actually named after them. It's called the Harrington campus. And so when we originally went to the site, it didn't have a name, but afterwards, after we worked there for a few hours, we decided to name it Sonic Cicada, because the cicada were starting to hatch, and the way that the shelter was shaped, it was amplifying that noise, and it was so disorienting, and it physically made me nauseous, but it was literally driving us insane. And so that kind of fueled a lot of the themes as we continued to name other sites. We would name the sites based on aspects of it, what we saw on the rock art, or maybe even experiences that we had there, like Sonic Cicada, especially if the site was particularly worthy of, not worthy, but a lot of these sites deserve names that just didn't have them initially. And probably the excitement that you're seeing in our faces, that we're excited that we're going to get to leave right after this photo was taken, because this is the very last thing we did before we left. And so we were off and running. This site's known as Running Horse. This is actually a really beautifully painted horse, historically, that you can see kind of in the background that we're very poorly mimicking. And if you can actually go see this site, it's on public land. It's at Seminole Canyon State Park here, located near Comstock. And if you take their Upper Canyon tour, you can actually go see the site. It's very cool. In 2017, we recorded 46 sites in about 5 months, which is pretty impressive. We were really booking it. In that upper right corner, you'll see us sitting on that ledge. That is Mystic Shelter, one of the more famous sites out here. And in the bottom left corner, that's us at Halo Shelter, another very famous Pecos River site out here. And you can tell both of those are really clear and very vibrant. They're very impressive sites. In 2018, we recorded another 66 sites, or sorry. We recorded another 66 sites. So you can see us hanging out in the upper right corner at some petroglyphs. Those petroglyphs are actually not very common here at all. We have far more pictographs here than we do petroglyphs. And so that's one of the very few petroglyph sites, Lewis Canyon. And then down at the bottom is Fatebell Shelter, which is another very famous, very massive rock shelter here that you can also see at the Seminole Canyon State Park, if you're interested. We were very excited because we got to actually step off the mats. And even the park archaeologist for Lake Amistad, that's one of the national recreation areas close to here, he's never been off the mat, so he was very jealous of us. In 2018, many of you were also able to come visit us for the donor weekend that we had that year. And so here's just a few snapshots of some of the people that were able to join us. Even that big group photo where I thanked all of you for your support was from the donor weekend, and we got to go out and show people some of the sites and basically just get to hang out with y'all and answer any questions that they had, anything that they just thought of. It was a really fun weekend, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed that experience. So still in 2018, a lot happened in 2018. We finally were able to move into our new facility. It was an old Border Patrol station that we were able to turn into our office, which was really great because before we were separated into 2 separate houses that were across the street from each other, but we were still kind of isolated from each other. So the chemistry lab was in one house and the archaeological team was in another house. And so this put us all under the same roof. We could actually talk to each other a lot more easily, and it gave Karen, or Dr. Steelman, a ton more room for her to set up her radiocarbon lab in the very back of the building. So it was really great. We also went to Washington, D.C. For a Society for American Archaeology conference, and that was a lot of fun. Got to share a lot of our results and things with our colleagues of what we were finding out during the course of the project. And we also started the Shumla blog, where we wrote up some short pieces about maybe some certain aspects of the rock art, maybe certain motifs. There is a blog post about our 10-day experience at Fatebell Shelter. It's a really massive site. There were probably about 33 to 34 separate sections that we had to split the rock art into. And for kind of reference, most of the time we don't have more than 1 or 2 sections at a lot of sites. And so for this one to have 34 it's gigantic. And we also started our Facebook or social media campaign, the Motif Monday. If y'all are on Facebook and have been following us, or even Instagram, we've been sharing a lot of these where we'll highlight a certain motif in the rock art, not just Pecos River style. We'll do some of the red linear, we'll do bold line geometric, and we'll just talk about some of the things that people may not know about the rock art. And so we'll share it, especially if it's coming from the literature, things that we are learning or have learned, and we just want to share with y'all so that y'all also have that information. So where does the time go? So we were coming to realize that documenting 10 sites per month was possible, but that's only if that was the only thing we did. If we only went out and collected data, we could absolutely do 10 sites a month. But we also needed to spend time kind of teaching and training interns and visiting scholars. We wanted to make sure that we were communicating with our peers in the scientific community. We wanted to share our progress with our funders, but we also wanted to share what we were learning with the general public. So that education aspect of the project is really important to all of us here. And so you can see all of the tasks that are colored in that tan color. Those are all the things that we had to do, that we put in our research design. And those are the things that we were doing to collect data for the project. Everything that you see in red were aspects of the project, but they weren't originally in the research design. So for example, you see 3D model on there. And so what that means is originally we planned to collect the photos for the 3D models, but we weren't going to run them because it was just going to take a lot of time. But we eventually figured out that we could use some of the lower resolution photos. So we weren't using the highest resolution we could, but we were still using JPEGs of really good quality, and they were actually creating models that were pretty good. And so that was a way for us we could run those lower res models far more quickly, and that enabled us to share them online with people, share them with the landowners who were also curious about what we were finding on their property, and it was hugely successful in our kind of outreach aspect of the project. So that's just like one aspect of something that we originally didn't really plan on doing, but we're very glad that we went back and kind of modified it. And something to kind of know is about research designs is that they're definitely a living document. We write this plan out to follow, but absolutely as we learn more things, or we figure out, some things may not be working, or we could tack on more things, we'll amend it in a way and kind of modify the work as time goes on. In 2019, we documented 51 more sites. And so, oh, my images are all distorted, I'm sorry. The one in the upper right is one of Carolyn's illustrations. You're actually going to see this particular panel several more times this year. And so it's a panel that the site we didn't know existed originally. We found out about it in 2019. What had happened was the landowners went into the J&P bar. Y'all know where that is if you've been to Comstock. It's the only bar in town. And they started asking questions about the rock art and things to the owners there at the bar. And so the owners called us. We were across the street in the office, and they asked us to come over. So Jared and I walked over there, and we talked to these people, and they were telling us about the site, and they were explaining where it was, and we didn't know it was there. But when we looked at the map, because we have GPS coordinates of where a lot of the previously known sites were, it was a very suspiciously void and empty area along the river. And we were like, okay, it's probably because people haven't looked here yet. And so we went there, and this panel ends up being there. And it's actually really low in the canyon, down in the Vega, really close to the Rio Grande. So we're genuinely surprised that it hadn't already washed away, but it already had suffered some pretty significant flood damage. And so the picture of me that's distorted there, I'm actually sitting in a lot of reeds. We had to cut some reeds and push them back so I could sit in them and take the GigaPan of the whole panel, which is that illustration that was done by Carolyn there. She illustrated from that GigaPan that we took that day. You're gonna hear more about that site. Karen did sample it for radiocarbon dating, but I'm not going to tell you what the date is because you'll have to watch her presentation. I can't give away all of her secrets. By the end of 2019, so that's 3 years now on the project, we were finally kind of settling into a routine and, you know, casually sitting at the sites, making it look easy. This site is called Myers Springs. It's a very famous rock art site out here in the Lower Pecos, Trans-Pecos area. It's actually not in Val Verde County. It's in the next adjacent county. But it has some Pecos River style elements there, but also just very cool historic period rock art. And so when we got the opportunity to go record this site, we absolutely took it because it's a very incredible and impressive site to go look at. The 3D models and the gigapans, if you want to see this, are online. You can view them. The landowner allowed us to share that access with people online. So we learned a lot of lessons during the course of the project. Some sites, and so this site here that you see is Parita Cave on the Rio Grande, we know could not be documented in only 1 or 2 days. They're far too big, and to complete the baseline documentation, it could take anywhere from 5 to 10 days. So for example, Fate Bell, like I mentioned earlier, that we separated into so many sections, that took us every bit of 10 days to do. In contrast to a lot of the typical site we would work at, it's maybe about 4 to 5 hours we would spend on the whole site, and we would collect everything that we would need to collect for that site. So we could do maybe 2 of those a site, but sites like these, the truly massive ones, are absolutely multi-day. Sometimes we have to go camp and work in the field for that long. We also started writing landowner and agency reports, and those are really important to us in terms of communicating with them a lot of the key information that we were figuring out, especially since they were such huge allies in us being able to access those sites and document them. And so we were spending a lot of time drafting and finalizing some of these reports, and it was taking a lot of our office time to be able to do, but it was something we absolutely felt like we had to do. Teaching and training. So I mentioned those interns earlier, but we also wanted to be able to share this information. We had visiting scholars come with us, and even the landowners. If the landowners wanted to stick around and hang out and ask us questions, we absolutely welcomed them to do that. We wanted them to be there to kind of experience the site and to give us the opportunity to kind of point out some key things, because it really, every time that happened, they got way more engaged and were way more excited about it at the end of the day than they probably were at the beginning of the day. So it always worked in our favor to be able to have them on site for us to talk to them, tell them why we're excited about something, for us to be able to explain how their site compares to, you know, the 200 and something other sites that we've now seen. And it was a very cool experience. So at the start of 2020, we were at about 163 sites. And so we had 62 more left to document to reach our goal of 225 sites by December of 2020. And so even having to spend three or so months locked in our houses from March to about May, we were still adamant about not modifying our goal and still going for it. And so this is just our way to kind of tease. So 218 there is in the upper right corner, 220 there down at the bottom left. So we were able to do 227 sites. That's our last recorded site. And so that's 64 more sites this year. So we're above where we wanted to be, and we can still probably record about 10 or 12 more sites by the end of this year. So we'll definitely exceed our goal, and we're pretty excited about that. So those project goals I told you to keep in mind. We were able to collect data to inform Lower Pecos rock art research. We have tons of it, and that's a lot of what our focus is going to be after the project ends. We did develop a list to determine the threatened site status and prioritize sites for future documentation. We took into consideration how clear the art was, what kind of condition it was in. We took into consideration what its status, how threatened is the site? Is it threatened by vandalism? Is it threatened by flooding? And we kind of put those factors into it. And we also considered one other thing that I can't remember right now, but basically we kind of averaged the scores there, and we're able to now kind of prioritize and flag certain sites for us to attack at the very beginning once we're ready to do that much more intensive documentation. We were able to build stronger relationships with the landowners, managers, and stewards. A lot of them have become much stronger allies for us. They're excited when they find new stuff on their property and they call us up and tell us about it. Some have even joined our board because of their experience with us, because of the Motif Monday posts. They all are really more engaged, and especially because it's a younger generation of landowners. A lot of when the initial research was being done, it was probably the parents of the current landowners. And so now the younger generation are taking over a lot of these ranches. And so they're kind of curious about what's going on, and they're very excited to kind of hear this sort of thing is going on right now. And it also helped us increase the awareness and the importance of preserving the rock art, especially with that younger generation of the land managers, stewards, and ranch owners out here that the majority of the rock art sites are located on. So that is the project in a nutshell. That's 3 to 4 years condensed into, I guess, about 30 minutes. So if you have any more questions, this is us at Jackrabbit Shelter, by the way, another site that Dr. Steelman will talk a little bit more about. We were just there 2 weeks ago during a large Cenizo bloom, and it was very cool. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, here's a variety of crew shots. These are important data to us too, because sometimes we forget about the time 3 sheepdogs wouldn't leave us alone on site. And so literally one person was the dog babysitter and had to kind of distract them while the rest of us were doing work. That was an interesting experience. That's all I have for y'all. Thank y'all very much for your time, your support, everything. We wouldn't be able to do this without y'all.